did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Childhood friends of Brian Kohberger, who pleaded guilty to stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death in November 2022, have tracked his murder case from afar and said they felt shocked the former Pennsylvania resident suddenly agreed to a plea deal to spare his life. That's from the Idaho Statesman. I won't lie, I kind of spiraled yesterday. Casey Arns, 32 years old, told the Idaho Statesman in a text, "Did he ever have thoughts like that before?" Well, of course he did.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Did he ever think he wanted to kill me or my friends? Were we spared because we were friends with him? Well, of those people close to Kohberger, very few seem to have any insights about him that are worth a damn, which I guess goes to show no one was particularly close to him. But I also think it goes to show how much do we really know a person. Ben Roberts, a former school colleague at WSU, does better than most. This is again quoting from the Idaho Statesman. I'll put a link to the article in the description. He was kind of non-existent. For Ben Roberts, 33, a former criminology graduate school colleague of Kohberger's at Washington State University, well, for him, Wednesday's guilty pleas felt past due. Roberts spent several weeks just a few desks away from Kohberger in the days leading up to the close of the fall 2022 semester, just days and weeks after the murders. Now, this is what's incredible. You have someone sitting right next to a quadruple murderer in a criminology class, and they're sitting there in the days leading up to and the days after the murders, and they can't see anything wrong. They don't notice any change in behavior. That in itself is shocking. I don't think it's so shocking that this idea that Kohberger was able to hide it. I think what is shocking is the inability of these people who are supposed to be trained to recognize this sort of thing, just cannot see it whatsoever. In any event, the article goes on to say his graduate school classmate rarely exhibited much in the way of emotion around him, but also did not necessarily set off any red flags, he said. Wow, so someone in your class who doesn't show any emotion, you didn't notice that? You didn't notice that when they were talking about these murders, you didn't notice his reaction to that? You've even got a former professor who's been the sort of go-to expert on this case who doesn't have anything to contribute either. I do think we get something more useful from Holly, a graduate student who said that she and Brian engaged in an awkward conversation when they were first introduced at a party. This is from E! Online. She says, I was kind of mingling and socializing, and I started chatting with this guy, and he told me that he had just moved and was starting his PhD. And then she added this, and I think this is very helpful. I definitely felt a little obliged to chat with him because to me, he seemed a little awkward. Kind of like you might expect for a PhD student who didn't know anyone at the party and was maybe trying his best to kind of get out there and be social and make friends. During their conversation, she told Brian about a hiking group that she was part of, and then they exchanged cell numbers. And then he texted her, and this was the text. Hey, I'm pretty sure we spoke about hiking trips yesterday. I really enjoyed that activity, so please let me know. Thanks. This was from July 10, 2022. Now, I would guess that this student, Holly, never responded to Brian and they never went hiking. That's just a guess, though. But coming back to the criminology classmate, right? Think about this. You're a criminology student and a classmate doesn't show any emotion. You don't see any red flags. You don't notice that this guy's quite awkward. You don't notice that he's making some odd remarks when he does make remarks. What do you notice? Well, he says, I noticed that unless he was deliberately trying to put on an appearance, if he didn't have the mask, he was kind of non-existent or hollow, I guess. These are his words, that Brian Kohberger was kind of non-existent or hollow. It's kind of like you're staring into an abyss. There's something human that's supposed to be there, and it isn't. So, no red flags about a hollow man sitting next to you in class, making hollow remarks. Do you know we do actually live in a society where it's easy to alienate and be alienated because the nuclear family is gone, so is the village structure, so much of our institutions, so much trust in our society is gone as well. We are a very polarized society today. We're a society that doesn't trust itself. We're a society that doesn't tell the truth to itself. You know, it was once a place where one person was raised as by an integrated society. We are now a disintegrated society. Now children are raised in a fragmented, broken, and distrustful society. Is it any wonder that this fragmented, broken, and distrustful society breeds hollow men, hollow young men? Plus, many sectors of society today are addicted to drugs and social media, or both. Now, it's interesting having a look at the hit-and-miss approach Brian's friends have at deciphering his criminal psychology. Back to the Idaho Statesman, quote, "They spend time together playing video games after school, as well as getting outdoors in the heavily forested region. As Kohberger got into drugs in high school," they said, "a distance developed." So there was even a distance between him and his best friends, his closest friends at school. Now, both video games and drugs are aggravating factors when it comes to someone who is more vulnerable to becoming lonely, a loner, an outcast. And outcasts, those who have become unglued to the fabric of society, those who find themselves on the outside looking in, will have little gluing them to anyone else, which is why they harbor their resentments in the first place. They blame society for rejecting them, but they also don't know how to reconnect, which then leads to more antisocial behavior, more video games, more drugs. Now, I'm sure some people listening to this will say, wow, I play video games, I'm not a killer. I don't have a homicidal impulse. I take a lot of drugs. I'm not homicidal. But do you play video games in a chronic way that's all you do all day, and you are you a very serious drug addict playing video games perhaps while you're on drugs? In other words, it's the extreme nature that we're talking about. Also, do you have no friends and you sort of inside all day just doing that? You can imagine that goes to a pretty dark place. Now, obviously, we're not saying drug users are criminals, just that extreme addictions in this area. And Brian was a heroin addict. I do have some familiarity with heroin, someone that I knew that used it. But so it's not a harmless drug by any means. And that alone can lead to very antisocial behavior and even criminal behavior. A person's mind and body is broken by these repeated chemical baths, and I wouldn't be surprised if Brian's visual snow problem was rooted in excessive hallucinogenic drug use as a teenager. Let's go back to the article. Donna Joswiak, Kohberger's high school guidance counselor, reacted with surprise at the plea deal. "Actually, I was hoping that he was not the murderer who killed these 4 students," she said in an email to the Statesman. You know, you get the feeling this hope isn't based on being educated on the case or educated on the facts, but rather just one's own connections to the perpetrator. You hope they're innocent because of how it reflects on you. Again, do you notice the absolute lack of critical thinking taking place here? I hope he's innocent because that helps me feel better about it. Not, maybe I should inform myself of the facts because I actually know this person. She goes on to say, "I hope that his family will survive this horrendous ordeal and be able to get on with their lives. Also, I hope that the victims' relatives gain much-needed closure and heal after this tragedy." All very politically correct statements, but ultimately quite vacuous. As a society, we may never know the motivation for the murders or if Brian Kohberger has any remorse for his violent actions. Well, it didn't seem like he had any remorse in court, did he? He didn't feel like he owed anyone an explanation. Well, we may never know what his motivation was if we don't start thinking for ourselves. Thinking for ourselves isn't someone else confessing. Thinking for ourselves isn't someone else telling us what their motivations are. Thinking for ourselves is finding out what isn't said or figuring out the truth in spite of what is said that isn't true. We live in a world where most people can't even tell you which news media is credible or reliable. So how do you think the average person is at judging just ordinary credibility in a person? And think about those words we dealt with earlier. He was kind of non-existent. That's a nice way of saying there was someone out there sitting next to me who was alive but kind of not. His existence was like non-existence, like death. But you know what? I didn't really talk to him. I just sort of noticed this about him and then, I guess, forgot about him, right? Well, there's your motive right there. Would you like to be in college non-existing while everyone around you is having the time of their lives? Well, the key is in the contrast. So you not even taking notice of this person's non-existence is making their non-existence worse. And, you might say that person didn't seem to show any emotion. You not going to that person and reaching out to them is also a kind of non-emotional response. He goes on to say, I just can't even begin to get inside the head of somebody who could do something like that and then attend class like it's business as usual. Well, did you ever get into that person's head just as a classmate? He says, that's just completely alien to me. Is that how you treated this person, even just as a person in your class, as a stranger, as an alien? Because it's actually not that alien. Playing violent computer games, doing drugs, obsessing about killers all day is hardly the stuff of a wholesome human being. And perhaps we live in a society where not only are we unable to recognize broken people that are right beside us, perhaps we've lost the ability to recognize or acknowledge what a wholesome human being is anymore. Or what is a wholesome human experience? How do you have a enjoyable holiday or a rest? What do you do? Where do you go? What activities do you take part in? What don't you do? In Brian's class, it was as if he was sort of slipping away and not talking to anyone, sidelined. Did no one notice that was taking place? Or was that actually the point, that he was intended to sort of be kept to one side while we enjoy ourselves? Roberts said he did not watch Wednesday's change of plea hearing. He was glad the high-profile case finally came to an end and without the need for a months-long trial. Wow, so you study criminology and you don't even have the stomach to watch a single morning of a plea deal hearing. Anyway, it goes on to say he didn't want to hear Kohberger's voice or see his face again, even though the latter has been difficult to escape the past 2 years, again according to the Idaho Statesman. Wasn't Kohberger deliberately ignored in class, just as this former colleague deliberately didn't want to watch the finale in court? Wasn't he deliberately, and this was done collectively by the whole class, wasn't he made into an outcast because he made some politically incorrect LGBTQ comments? Does anyone remember that? So why has that been forgotten about? I mean, now amnesia regarding that has conveniently set in when it comes to his motives, hasn't it? Is it any wonder, coming from such a shallow, superficial society, such a forgetful society, and this same society produces hollow individuals like this one, and then when horrors unfold, they innocently look to the sky and ask, why? And look at all the references to why in this particular paragraph at the end of this article. Do you want to know why? Or are you able to ask the question why and then try to find the answer?
Order the code red!
You don't have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Do you think we live in a society that can handle the truth? Do you think, in terms of our echo chambers on social media, do you think we're able to deal with things that we don't like to hear? Can we ask and answer the question why regarding ourselves even? Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.